Revenge with Karen.
All of it. The room was a crime scene of beige. Beige walls. Beige blinds pulled halfway down like they couldn't commit to being open or closed. Beige chairs with that sticky fake leather that squeaks when anyone shifts too fast. And in the center of it all, the beige soul of corporate cowardice, HR, Victoria didn't sit immediately. She scanned the room like she was reading a battlefield. Fluorescent lights buzzed just a touch too loud. Single notepad sat unopened at her side of the table, like someone had made a last-minute decision to pretend this was a collaborative discussion and not an ambush. The CEO's son, Chase, because of course his name was Chase, sat across the table, all smug posture and silicone confidence. His suit was expensive, but the tailoring was wrong. It hung on him like money draped over insecurity. He didn't even stand when she entered, just offered a too-wide grin and tapped the folder in front of him like a magician about to reveal the world's saddest card trick. "Victoria," he said, like he'd been practicing the name. "Glad you could make it." HR cleared her throat. Marla again, this time with a clipboard and trembling hands. She looked like she hadn't slept. Or maybe she had, but only with the kind of melatonin-induced dread that comes from knowing you're about to help light someone on fire. Chase leaned back and laced his fingers behind his head. "We're streamlining, innovating, evolving, and unfortunately some legacy structures aren't aligned with the vision going forward." He tapped the folder again. "You're terminated, effective immediately. Also, standard note, but I'll say it myself, do not rehire. Just to keep things clean." Victoria looked at the folder but didn't touch it. Marla tried to pick up the script. Her voice was paper-thin. "As of today, your employment with the company is officially concluded. You are required to return all company property and refrain from disclosing proprietary." Chase interrupted, gesturing like a bored CEO in a B-list Netflix drama. "Come on, Marla, let's not make this clinical. Victoria's a grown-up. She knows how these things go." Victoria finally sat, slow, measured. She opened the folder and began reading line by line. Not skimming, reading. It was unnerving, like watching someone calmly take apart a bomb while the timer still blinked. Severance, 2 weeks. Stock options, voided. Access, revoked by EOD. Rehire status, blacklisted. There was even a clause about social media conduct, as if she was the kind of person who'd vent on Facebook between wine memes and beach photos from 2008. She picked up the pen, held it, rolled it between her fingers. "Is there any room for questions?" Marla asked. Voice brittle, Chase answered for her. "No, this comes from the top, total restructure. Honestly, it's not personal, you've just been outpaced. This company moves fast now. We can't afford to be sentimental." Victoria smiled softly at that. It wasn't warm, more like the smile you give someone who tells you the sun rises in the west and you decide it's not worth the effort to explain physics. She signed, initialed, flipped the pages and signed again. The pen barely made a sound. Chase blinked. "You're taking this well." Still no words from her. Just a small nod like she was agreeing with a waiter about a salad choice. He tried again, seriously. No hard feelings, her eyes lifted, finally meeting his. "You're very proud of yourself, aren't you?" That one sentence deflated the room. Marla froze. Chase's smirk faltered, just a fraction. "I'm just doing what needs to be done," he said, voice sharper now. "The board agrees." Victoria stood. She didn't take the folder. She didn't ask for copy. Her phone buzzed in her pocket once and she ignored it. She just picked up her purse and turned toward the door. Behind her, Chase said something else. A parting jab, something like "hope you find your next chapter" or "all the best." It didn't land. He sounded like a boy playing CEO on Bring Your Kid to Work Day. Marla opened the door for her, lips pressed together like a secret she couldn't keep. Victoria stepped into the hallway. She felt every eye that watched her leave. Some pitied her. Some were grateful it wasn't them. Most were too scared to blink. She didn't break stride. Not when the security badge on her chest beeped red at the exit scanner. Not when her email account locked out mid-scroll on her phone. Not when the elevator ride down felt like it dropped her through a floor she'd spent a decade building. No fight, no yelling, not even a whispered threat. But beneath the silence behind the calm, something old had just woken up. Something they had all forgotten. She stepped into the parking lot, opened the trunk of her car, and reached beneath the false bottom where the company archive drive had sat for years, untouched, forgotten. She clicked it into her laptop. The encryption field blinked. Password, remembered. Inside were documents no one else had touched in 11 years. Originals, signatures, founders' agreements, voting rights, and one clause, one single clause. She didn't need revenge. She already had ownership. They just hadn't remembered yet, but they would, soon. The hallway fell into one of those silences that feels physical, like humidity or static or judgment with a name tag. Every set of eyes followed her as she walked. No one spoke. Not the IT guy who used to bring her kombucha from the break room fridge. Not the junior analyst who once cried in her office after botching a quarter-inch close. Not even Sheila from marketing, whose loyalty shifted with the wind and who now looked at Victoria like she was radioactive. The click of her heels sounded like gunshots in a church. She didn't flinch. She didn't slow. She reached the security desk. A kid barely out of college was posted there, a temp who'd smiled too hard during onboarding and hadn't smiled since. Looked at her wide-eyed. Stood up halfway, unsure if protocol required some sort of escort now that she was, what? A threat? A ghost? Victoria removed her badge, the laminated photo slightly warped from years of sun and desk heat. She set it on the counter. No flourish, no drama, just a gesture of finality. Thanks, she said, not to the kid, to the building. He didn't respond. She didn't expect him to. The glass doors opened with a hiss. She stepped into the parking lot where the air didn't smell like toner and recycled ambition. For the first time in years, no access badge lived on her hip. No inbox waited to ambush her. No executive meeting loomed with fake smiles and silent knives. Her car was a steel gray Audi. Practical, fast, unremarkable to anyone except the kind of people who notice understated power. She slid into the driver's seat, locked the door, and sat for 10 seconds, just breathing. Then, like a surgeon entering an operating room, she reached under the passenger seat and retrieved a matte black USB drive wrapped in an old microfiber cloth. It looked like nothing, just a scratched, fingerprint-smudged memory stick. But inside it lived ghosts, documents, agreements, clauses from a time before the company had a name people could pronounce. Before the board was a thing, for Chase existed in any capacity other than a bratty child stealing hors d'oeuvres at investor dinners. She plugged the drive into her dashboard. The car's screen flickered, then blinked green. A single menu appeared, execute protocol. She touched the screen once, then pulled out her phone, one contact. No name, she pressed call. The voice on the other end answered on the second ring. No greeting, just silence. Activate the clause, Victoria said, all of it. The line went dead. An office 17 floors above, embedded in the compliance department like a sleeping lion, Owen Dale was mid-scroll through expense reports when a single email dropped into his inbox. It had no subject, no sender address, just a one-word body, activated. He stared at it, then glanced at the Slack channel where someone had just posted, was that the Victoria who just walked out? Owen closed his laptop without replying. He stood, walked to the far wall of his office, and unlocked the tall gray cabinet no one ever touched. Inside, paper files, legal originals, and a single, sealed manila envelope marked Founders Equity Protocol in event of hostile action. His hands shook only a little as he pulled it out. Across the floor, the company buzzed with nervous energy. People whispering. Gossip sprinting faster than email servers could handle. Someone already photoshopped a meme of Chase as Thanos. It's funny. For now. Owen slid back into his chair. Opened the envelope. Clause 14.2b. In the event of an involuntary termination initiated without majority board vote or founder consent, control rights, voting leverage, and access reinstatement will revert to the original founding shareholder identified as Graves v. This clause is immutable, binding, and preempts bylaws adopted post-Series A. He leaned back, blew out a slow breath, and opened his secure DOJ contact form and selected the drop-down labeled Suspicious Activity Report Executive Action. Under Details, he typed, Termination of V. Graves executed by non-board member C. Devlin, potential violation of voting trust. Clause 14.2b activated. Immediate legal review advised. He attached the clause scan, pressed send. Then he reached for the bottle of antacids in his drawer. Down 2. Across town, Victoria pulled onto the freeway, merged with clinical precision, and smiled without warmth. This wasn't revenge. This was insurance. 11 years of building quietly, fixing things, cleaning up messes so the men in suits could smile in interviews and slap each other's backs at rooftop parties. Let them call her cold. Let them call her obsolete. They forgot who drafted the architecture. They forgot who held the real keys. But the system didn't forget. Now it was awake. Back then, the office wasn't a sleek glass high-rise or sterile open-plan zoo with kombucha taps and meditation pods. It was the back room of an abandoned print shop that still smelled faintly of toner and failure. The windows didn't open. The Wi-Fi cut out every time someone microwaved leftovers, and the heating only worked if you kicked the breaker box like it owed you money. Victoria didn't care. She was 29, sleep-deprived, caffeinated beyond medical safety, and convinced she could build something better than the dead-eyed corporations chewing up the workforce one non-compete clause at a time. So when Alan Devlin, the man who would eventually become CEO, pitched her on joining something special, she laughed in his face. But he didn't flinch, just slid a folder across the wobbly IKEA desk and said, "I can't pay much, but I can offer a seat at the table, a real one." She opened it. Founders Agreement, LLC documents. He'd left her space to fill in her own terms. It was the smartest thing he ever did. The dumbest, too. She spent 3 days drafting her employment clause. Not with the desperation of someone clawing for relevance, but with the cold clarity of someone who knew exactly what value looked like, and how rarely men recognized it when it wasn't wearing a blazer and an ego. She didn't ask for a fancy title. Just co-founder. Didn't demand a salary bump. Just 51% of the original class a shares. But then came the genius, a clause buried in a section titled Operational Authority and Founding Equity Rights. On paper, it looked like boilerplate legalese, but the wording was surgical. In the event of termination, without a majority vote from the founding board, and in the absence of a formal equity sale or transfer, all operational and voting rights revert to the founding signatory herein designated as Graves v. She brought it to Alan and watched him squint at it like it was written in Sanskrit. He tapped the line with a bitten-down pen. "What's this mean, exactly?" She sipped her coffee. "It means if you try to screw me later without doing it properly, I get the keys to the kingdom back." He laughed. "Like a safety net?" "No," she said, locking eyes with him. "Like a dead man's switch." Shrugged, signed. Back then, he needed her more than she needed him. And for years, she earned it. She built the compliance structure that saved them during the Series B audit. She patched the HR disaster after Alan's second divorce spilled into the office. She rewrote every operations manual after the data breach they swore never happened. She held the company together with blood, spreadsheets, and nights no one ever saw. And when Chase was still learning how to tie a tie, Victoria was negotiating vendor contracts that kept the lights on. But slowly, as the company grew, the story changed. Alan became the visionary. The team became his people. Victoria, she became operations lead on the org chart, and Vic in Slack channels she wasn't invited to anymore. No one read the old documents. They just scanned the digital copies buried in the server, assuming the new bylaws and diluted cap tables had overwritten the past. Equity isn't a vibe. Control doesn't evaporate just because the office gets an espresso machine. She'd watched it all. Let them forget. Let them assume she was content to fade into process management and compliance hell. All while she quietly declined every secondary sale, every buyout pitch, every "it's just paperwork" email from legal. Because her clause, it only worked if her equity stayed above 50%. And it had. For 11 years. She never sold a single share. Not one. That's why she hadn't screamed when Chase fired her. That's why she hadn't begged. Because the moment he scrawled his name on that termination form, without board vote, without founder notification, without any of the protocols she'd quietly embedded like legal landmines, he triggered the clause. And now, every executive decision made since that moment sat on a scaffold built out of sand. Back in the print shop days, Alan once joked, "You're the spine of this company." She remembered smiling and replying, "Funny thing about spines. You don't notice them until they break." In her apartment, dimly lit and minimal as a monk's cell, Victoria sat in front of her personal server. Not a cloud drive, a real air-gapped server. The files were still there, all of it, original incorporation documents, signature scans, handwritten notes from Alan himself about founder intent, and her clause, movable, legally binding. Waiting. She leaned back, cracked her knuckles, and opened a new message to her lawyer. The subject line read, "Clause triggered, begin phase 2, because silence wasn't weakness, it was positioning." It started like most disasters do, quietly, with someone underpaid pressing a button they didn't fully understand. At exactly 10:54 a.m., the receptionist at the front desk, Chloe, fresh out of college and 2 weeks into this job, saw a man in a navy windbreaker step through the glass doors. He didn't have a visitor badge, didn't fumble with the check-in tablet, just walked up, flipped open a leather ID case, and said, "Special Agent Victor Penn, Financial Crimes Division. I need to speak with someone in leadership." Now. She blinked, unsure if this was a prank or some kind of social engineering test. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, because the onboarding script said to maintain polite control. Agent didn't blink. "No, I have a SAR tied to executive activity in this building. Pull whoever you call C-suite before I start pulling data subpoenas." She froze, then picked up the phone with shaking hands. Upstairs, the board was mid-lunch. Not in a formal meeting, just clumped together around the executive floor's marble island counter, pretending to care about Chase's TED talk-style pitch for vision-led scalability. The guy had slides, actual printed slides. Some of them included his own quotes in bold. And that's why, Chase was saying, gesturing with a single AirPod in like it gave him gravitas, "I believe this transition is about narrative alignment, not just operational shifts. We're rewriting the company's story." His audience nodded with the glazed-over expressions of people praying for an unscheduled fire drill. Then Mary from legal poked her head in. We've got a situation," she said, eyes darting. "There's a federal agent downstairs. Financial Crimes Division. Says he needs to speak to leadership." Everyone looked at each other, that confused half-smile spreading across their faces like maybe this was just a really committed practical joke. Chase smirked. "Relax. Probably a vendor compliance check. We had that wire transfer audit last month, right?" "I think it's serious," Mary whispered. He brought a file. 5 minutes later, Agent Penn was escorted into the 12th floor conference room, known internally as the aquarium, because of its glass walls and the way people on the outside could always see the sharks feeding. Penn didn't sit, didn't accept water, didn't smile. He placed a thick manila folder on the table and flipped it open with slow, methodical movements. "3 days ago," he began, "we received a suspicious activity report from your compliance department. Filed anonymously, with credentials. That report detailed several discrepancies in internal approvals, executive expense redirections, and sudden changes to high-level personnel access." Chase raised a hand, trying to steer. "Look, Agent Penn, I'm sure whatever that was, I'm not finished," Penn said, voice flat. "The SAR included references to a terminated employee with long-standing control privileges. Victoria Graves." The room stilled. "I'm here because of federal investigation, unrelated to your organization, mind you. Cross-referenced a contract clause buried in one of your early incorporation filings. A clause that was activated via a legally binding signal roughly 30 minutes after Miss Graves' employment was ended." A low murmur spread. CFO Mark blinked. "We ended her position this morning. Part of restructuring." Penn turned the page in his folder. "And who authorized the termination?" All eyes slid to Chase. Chase cleared his throat. "I did, it was. Well within my authority." Penn's eyebrow twitched. "Based on." Chase leaned back, trying for casual but landing squarely and rattled. "I'm the chief vision officer. My father delegated me restructuring oversight while he's abroad." "Your father being Alan Devlin, yes?" Penn said, flipping another page. "Currently out of the country, unreachable, and based on our travel records, last seen boarding a flight to Zurich." "So, at this exact moment, you are the highest-ranking executive on site?" "I suppose so," Chase muttered. Penn nodded once. "Then you'll be the one answering the next set of questions. In private, with counsel." The legal team stiffened. "Wait," someone from the board said, panic starting to bloom. "What exactly are you implying here?" Agent Penn didn't answer. He just picked up his folder, nodded toward the inner boardroom, and said, "Let's go." Chase followed, visibly paler than before, trying to mask it with that same arrogant bounce in his step that now looked more like a limp. The glass door closed. Behind it, the board was left blinking, suddenly aware that the power in the room had shifted, and no one had noticed the tremor until the aftershock arrived. Mary turned to Mark. "What clause is he talking about?" Mark shook his head, looking suddenly 10 years older. "I don't know. But if this is what I think it is, we're in deep." Down in the lobby, Chloe watched the security cameras. She saw Chase disappear behind the boardroom doors with the Fed. Then she saw something else. Victoria Graves, across the street, seated at the cafe window, sipping tea, watching the building, smiling. Inside the boardroom, the temperature dropped 10 degrees the moment Agent Penn opened the folder. No PowerPoint, no bullet points. Just paper, thick, weighty documents that smelled like consequences. Laid them out one by one with surgeon's precision. No words wasted. No chances to pivot. Here's a vendor invoice for $84,000 processed through a Shell LLC registered in Nevada. Same mailing address as one of your executive assistants, who, by the way, listed this company as her side hustle on LinkedIn 2 years ago. He slid it across the table. Here's another. $112,000 for strategic consulting, no hours logged, no deliverables, no contact information beyond a Gmail address. Another sheet. A pause. And here we have an expense reimbursement, approved by Mr. Devlin. He looked directly at Chase for a $14,300 charge to what appears to be a private villa in Cabo San Lucas, listed under Client Retreat. Cross-referencing internal calendars, there were no clients present, just Mr. Devlin and a +1 identified only as Janelle Kissmark in the notes field. The room was silent except for the whisper of people pulling in shallow breaths. Chase adjusted his collar, trying to inject a smirk. Okay, I see what this is. You're here to make a show. Congrats, you found some sloppy bookkeeping. We'll fix it. Penn didn't blink. Sloppy bookkeeping doesn't usually trigger SARS with language, like attempted concealment of founder control clause activation. He let that one hang in the air like a gas leak. Across the table, Mark from finance shifted uncomfortably. Mary from legal was already scribbling notes like her pen might turn back time. Two board members exchanged glances, real ones, not the rehearsed type they used for photo ops. Penn tapped the folder again. What I need to know right now is who authorized the termination of Victoria Graves. The silence that followed wasn't hesitation, it was avoidance. Everyone knew the answer. No one wanted to say it, until Owen Dale, compliance officer, cleared his throat. I received the HR form this morning, he said, measured and careful. It had Mr. Devlin's signature, but there was no accompanying board resolution. No founder consultation. Was filed like a standard at-will termination, not a C-level exec or founder exit. He glanced at Chase. Which is problematic. Chase rolled his eyes. Are you kidding me? She was middle management. She had operations in her title. She wasn't even a VP. Owen's face didn't change. Her original contract didn't require a VP title. The role predates the org chart. She was dead weight, Chase snapped, louder now. You have any idea how bloated our processes were under her? Half the staff didn't even know what she did. Funny, Owen said quietly, yet everything still worked. Mary leaned forward. Chase, did you review her contract before finalizing the termination? No, I didn't review it. I don't need to review every contract. That's your job. Agent Penn raised a finger. That contract, Mr. Devlin, includes a clause that affects operational control. If triggered improperly, it could invalidate any decisions made under your authority, especially if you were never granted formal controlling officer status in writing. Chase's face flushed. Look, I've been acting on behalf of my father. He put me in charge. There is no written delegation. Mary interrupted, panic edging into her tone now. He mentioned it verbally, but legal never documented the transition. Technically, Alan Devlin is still CEO. And where is Mr. Devlin? And asked, though he already knew. Abroad, Mary said, on medical leave, unreachable, Penn pressed. Everyone nodded and the fuse burned shorter. Penn tapped his pen against the table. So the person who authorized the firing of a co-founder is not legally empowered to do so, has no documentation granting them such authority, and failed to review a foundational contract that directly controls ownership structure. Chase barked a laugh, but it came out cracked. Okay, this is ridiculous. She's gone. She signed the forms. We locked her out. We're not children playing with Lego. She's not going to just walk back in and take over. She doesn't have to, Owen said, voice steady. The clause isn't about physical access. It's about control. Voting rights, access to decision-making authority. The moment you filed that form, you gave it back to her. Chase stood up, pacing now. We'll fix it. I'll talk to legal. We'll amend the record, override whatever clause she thinks she owns. Penn closed his folder. You can't override what was never properly replaced. The original incorporation still holds. Mary looked sick. If that clause holds, every decision made since her termination is legally exposed. Worse, Owen added, it means she might be the only person with legitimate control right now. Chase spun around, eyes wild. Are you telling me we're in a building, operating under her rules? Penn shrugged. I'm telling you she never stopped being the majority shareholder. You just woke her up. No one spoke after that. In the hall, someone coughed. From across the street, through the wide aquarium glass, Victoria still watched, calm, composed, untouched. The boardroom had just caught fire, and not one of them had seen the match in her hand. Agent Penn leaned back in the boardroom chair, arms crossed, folder resting on his lap like a coiled trap. Air had thickened into something almost physical, an invisible weight pressing into every throat and lung. Outside, the usual office hum continued, Keyboards clicking, phones chirping, someone heating fish in the break room microwave like the world hadn't just tilted. Inside, different story. Let me be absolutely clear, Penn said, calm as a guillotine. This isn't about missed vendor payments or reimbursement irregularities anymore. Now in the territory of unauthorized executive action, potential misrepresentation of leadership authority, and possible shareholder fraud. His eyes scanned the room, letting each word marinate. Which brings me to a very simple question. He placed a hand on the folder, just rested it there. Tension bloomed across the table like ink in water. Who authorized the termination of Victoria Graves? Silence. The kind that dares someone to be stupid enough to speak. Then, like a kid caught shoplifting who doubles down instead of apologizing, Chase cleared his throat and said, "I did." He leaned forward, all fake confidence and nervous adrenaline. I don't know what all this drama is about, but Victoria was a redundancy. She wasn't scaling. Her management style was outdated. She hadn't contributed to innovation discussions in years. We need people who move fast. She was slow, obsolete. Everyone's replaceable. Across the table, Ark's jaw tightened. Mary set her pen down slowly, like it might explode if she kept holding it. Owen Dale closed his laptop. Fully, silently. Penn's expression didn't change. He simply nodded once and opened the folder. Thank you for clarifying. He flipped through the papers, slow, methodical, until he reached a page marked with a green tab. This, he said, placing it on the table and sliding it across to Chase, is the original founder's employment agreement signed in May 2012. Chase didn't touch it. Penn tapped it. Page 14. Paragraph 2. Mary reached for it first, scanned, her face blanched. Then she read it aloud, barely above a whisper. In the event of involuntary termination initiated without majority board consent, and in the absence of a formal divestiture of controlling equity, all operational control rights, including voting authority and executive decision veto power, revert in full to the founding shareholder identified herein as Graves v. The words fell like bricks. Heavy, permanent. What the hell does that even mean? Chase snapped. It means, Owen said quietly, the moment you fired her without board approval, and without checking her equity position, she regained control of the company. Mark looked like he'd just swallowed a live battery. Still owns over 50%? That can't be right. We diluted the hell out of those original shares. Wrong, Owen said. She never participated in any of the secondary offerings. Never converted, never sold. Her class of shares were never touched. She's been sitting on majority control this entire time, and none of us noticed. Chase laughed, a hollow, brittle sound. That's impossible. My father would have seen that. Your father, Mary said through clenched teeth, signed the original clause. It's in his handwriting. He probably forgot about it the second we raised Series A. Penn nodded. You all assumed the bylaws and cap table modifications replaced the founding agreement. They didn't. The clause wasn't time-sensitive. It's enforceable. And as of 4 hours ago, it's been triggered. A stunned silence took over the room. Then Chase stood, pointing a trembling finger. You're seriously saying this? This boomer buried a legal trap and waited a decade to spring it. No, Owen said. She built the company, protected it for 11 years, and trusted you not to be dumb enough to wake it up. Agent Penn stood now too, not rushed, not aggressive, just a deliberate signal that this was no longer a conversation. This entire organization, he said, has been making decisions under the false belief that Miss Graves held no operational authority. If her control has been reactivated, then any major decisions made since her termination, executive hires, vendor contracts, even financial filings may be invalid. And if those decisions resulted in profit, loss, or public reporting discrepancies, that's a problem. Chase tried to speak. Couldn't. The room had fully turned. No one was backing him now. Even the board members he once schmoozed with over golf and cocktails stared like they were just now realizing they'd backed a defective product. Penn closed the folder. Need access to all internal communications relating to her termination, and I'll need the board to remain on site for further review. Mark ran a hand down his face. Jesus Christ, is she coming back? One of the board members whispered. Owen didn't look up from his notes. She never left, he said. You just didn't notice she still held the deed to the house while you were redecorating. Across the street, Victoria finished her tea, calm, collected, watching the glass tower across from her like it was an exhibit in a zoo. Inside that building, they were finally seeing the bars. Agent Penn stood at the head of the table, posture military precise, his voice slicing through the boardroom like a scalpel. He didn't shout. He didn't rush. That made it worse. In the event of termination, he began, flipping the page with a neat snap, without majority board approval. Everyone in the room tensed. Some leaned forward. Others stopped breathing entirely. All voting rights revert to Miss Graves if her equity position is above 50%. He let the silence expand. Let the words sink like stone into water. Then he looked directly at Chase. She's still above 50%, isn't she? Mark, the CFO, stuttered. I mean, we assumed after dilution rounds, Series C, we never officially updated. Penn raised an eyebrow. Did she sell any shares? Mark shook his head. No, she didn't participate in the new rounds either. We just figured it would all average out over time. Penn turned to Owen. Is she still on file as holding Class a majority equity? Owen didn't answer immediately. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a printed ledger, real paper, and slid it across the table. I double-checked when the clause was triggered. Our internal records, the Delaware filings, everything. She never relinquished her position. Not once. Mark's face turned gray. You're telling me she's been the majority owner this entire time, and none of us, not even legal, noticed? She didn't need us to notice, Owen said. That's the point. The clause only activates upon unilateral termination. Until then, it sat dormant, silent, waiting. Across the table, Mary's hand trembled as she reached for the contract again. This is catastrophic, she whispered. We've approved audits, bonuses, contracts, budget reallocations, all under the assumption Chase held operating control. If she has voting power, she can reverse everything. Chase scoffed, desperate now. No, that's no. I was named Chief Vision Officer by my father. I've been leading this company. Penn didn't even look up from his file. You were playing CEO without a license, son. You made unilateral decisions with no legal foundation. You overstepped your authority, executed a termination without proper review, and just invalidated months of executive actions. But we locked her out, Chase muttered, staring into the table like it might crack open and swallow him whole. She doesn't even have email access. Owen leaned forward, voice flat. Email isn't ownership. Control isn't about who talks the loudest. It's about who wrote the foundation. Penn turned to the security chief standing in the corner, silent until now. You confirm ownership status. The man stepped forward, tapping into the internal access panel mounted on the wall. The screen blinked to life. He keyed in a few commands, then turned back. Database still lists Victoria Graves as primary shareholder and Class A majority owner. Last update was never. The record was never amended. Penn tilted his head. Did Mr. Devlin, he glanced at Chase, ever request an update to shareholder status? No, sir, security chief replied. No flags, no documentation, no ownership change requests on file. Nothing. Penn nodded. Then this company's been operating under a false assumption of control for months, possibly years. The weight of it finally hit. It was visible. The room itself sagged, shoulders slumped, jaws went slack, and the illusion shattered in real time. The empire Chase thought he ran, dust. The title, hollow. The restructure he paraded like a coup, equally meaningless. Mary leaned back, looking at no one, her voice cracked and quiet. Every contract she didn't sign is reversible. Every executive vote taken since this morning is invalid. We're exposed on every front. She could dissolve the board, Owen said softly. Right now, legally, with a single vote. Chase laughed, just once. Dry, panicked. She won't. She wouldn't. She's not like that. Are you sure? Penn asked. Because Chase wasn't anymore. Thought she was gone. Thought she was decoration. A fading name on outdated paperwork. He never asked himself why she never cashed out. Never questioned why she still got copies of investor updates. Never noticed the silence. Because silence doesn't feel dangerous until it stands up. Outside, the clouds were shifting. A slow overcast rolled over the skyline as if even the weather had aligned itself to watch. Across the street, the cafe's front window caught the light just right, revealing the reflection of Victoria's car still parked nearby. She wasn't hiding. She was waiting. And inside the boardroom, with every breath, they understood a little more. She hadn't lost power. They'd just been living in borrowed time. Agent Penn closed the folder with a finality that echoed louder than the soft thud of cardboard and paper deserved. Looked at Chase like a funeral director eyeing a man who hadn't realized the casket was for him. You just fired the owner of the company, he said. The words were clean, surgical. They didn't shout. They didn't demand. They just were, truth wrapped in steel. Chase opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His jaw worked like he was chewing on panic. Sweat had gathered along his temples, darkening the crisp edges of his designer shirt. Every eye in the room was fixed on him now, not with judgment, but with the dawning horror of shareholders realizing they'd hitched their wagon to a wet sparkler in a lightning storm. The boardroom door creaked open. A man in a navy suit slipped in like he was hoping the floor might swallow him mid-step. Legal counsel. His name was Darren. No one had seen him in weeks. Rumor was he'd been buried under merger contracts and barely slept. He didn't sit, just leaned down and whispered to Mary from legal, but loud enough for everyone to hear. We're exposed, deeply. The clause is real. Her equity position hasn't changed. She can void every executive decision made this quarter, possibly longer. It's already on record. Mary pressed her hand over her mouth. Someone at the far end of the table swore softly. The board chair, a granite-faced man named Roland, who'd spent 20 years pretending to be the adult in the room, stood up slowly. Get her on the phone, he said, voice flat as concrete. Now. Chase didn't move now, Chase. He scrambled for his phone, fingers shaking. For once, he didn't try to make it about himself. No smug spin, no joke, just panic. Across the street, Victoria sat in the cafe by the window, stirring her tea with precise little motions, the kind you develop from years of silently controlling chaos. She wore a soft blue blouse. Minimal makeup, hair tied back not for effect but for war. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number, but she knew who it was. She let it ring. Once, twice. Then she answered, no rush, no performance, just silence, measured and unshakable. On the other end, the room was dead quiet. Only Chase's breath filtered through the speaker, ragged like someone trying not to cry in a courtroom. He finally spoke. Victoria, there's been some confusion. Board would like to discuss a possible resolution. Clarify terms. We'd really like to invite you back into the conversation. Victoria looked out the window at the tower she helped build, the one filled with people who forgot who poured the foundation. Her reflection stared back, calm, centered, inevitable. She sipped her tea, then spoke. You fired me, that was cute. She paused, just long enough. Let me reintroduce myself, majority owner, effective now. With that, she hung up. No theatrics, no scream, just the truth delivered like a signature on a contract no one bothered to read. Inside the boardroom, Chase lowered the phone slowly. No one said a word, because they all understood. The meeting wasn't about fixing it anymore. It was about surviving what came next. You're the real stars of the corporate jungle. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, or I'll flick the switch on your old cubicle memories.